You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today, we are talking with Caretha Coleman, owner and founder of Coleman Consulting, considered a trusted leader in Silicon Valley. Caretha has dedicated her career to strengthening the corporate skill sets of African Americans being chosen to participate on boards and entering executive careers. She recruits for boards and corporations with a conscious eye out for people of color. Her abilities at finding and nurturing talented people has gained her the title of a visionary.
Yeah, I'm busy, but I think in some ways it's a really good busy because a lot of the unexpected traffic is, are people who are interested in talking about Black Lives Matter and the issues and how can they help and what can they do, and oh my God, I'm shocked, which those conversations make me crazy. But the others, where people really are wanting to engage and do something, substantive to really move the dial, I'm very happy to engage in.
I think it's a tipping point, number one, and a real opportunity for all of us to learn together going forward. What do we want this new world, I shall say, to look like and feel like for others?
Yeah. I agree.
This happened in the 60s when Al and I first came to the Bay Area. It was happening, right. But this is a whole different feel. This is pretty serious.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. So.
And that last speech I heard you give was so on the mark.
In November, Ken and I have talked about that. It's so crazy. Who knew?
And you probably felt you were way over your skis. Well, now you're holding onto the back of the sled and saying, "Oh my
exactly.
God!"
Yeah. I'm just so pleased at where we are trying to go, and not where we are, but where we're trying to go.
I just hope, Caretha, that going forward we slow it down a bit, and really be thoughtful about the direction we go in. And I hope that the younger people listen to some of us who have been through this. When they start sitting down to make those policies and changes, they listen to us and learn from us. That's my hope.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, when I was thinking about some of the questions that you sent, one of the things that I think is very important about this moment is not that I don't want it to be a moment. 10 years from now, I don't want us to be talking and saying, that was a great moment, right? And that's all it was. And it was full of great intentions, but nothing ever happened. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is that with all of these companies and organizations that are throwing money at the problem and saying, I'm going to write a check for 40 million, 150 million, whatever that number is, that they also understand that there's a responsibility. They can say, and will have a right to say, look, I wrote these big checks. I gave these people money. And look, nothing came of it, right? Because you didn't require anything. You didn't say how the game was played. You weren't giving them direction on how they were going to be evaluated. And one of the things that I worry about and have been worried about in the last few years about the people that I talk to who have been sort of named and anointed the diversity person in the company. They keep moving around. And part of that reason is because they have the title, but that's it. They have no resources in terms of dollars and budget. They have no accountability. They don't know what they're going to be held accountable for. They're sort of left to their own devices to make mistakes along the way, which is fine. But those mistakes can be very costly if you have no agenda, right?
Absolutely.
Sort of like, okay, you had the title, now you're out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't even know.
We used to call that window dressing.
Yeah.
And we put that person up front so you could see, quote unquote, see them. But as far as any results expected from them, they were suspect.
And if they happen to get it right, wonderful, and they're sort of the god for the day. But, in terms of building something sustainable that other people can copy and take as best practices, right? All the things that we learned.
Yes.
Not that we necessarily knew what we were doing when we did it.
No. It was a numbers game. We got the people in, we got the numbers right, it looked really good. We didn't have any argument with the government, and we'd go to the next year and try our best to make sure that report was up to par each year. But what we didn't do was say, within those numbers, who is moving where in the company, and what are our goals internally, not necessarily externally. Because we can find the folks to fill the slots.
Right.
But what about the internal movement, the career pathing, that structure that most people who start a career have? We got in and got a job, but we didn't necessarily have a career.
And I think also now, in these last few months, people are getting more permission.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing, is even though there were some of us in the seats, even in the recent past, do it. And so if there's no agenda, create one. Go to your CEO and say, here's what I'm working on. What do you think? Mm-hmm. These are my objectives. What do you think about that? Give them something to react to.
Right. Teach him.
So I'm hoping that that's happening.
Yeah. Teach the CEO what it is that is needed.
Right. You have a perfect right to expect this from me. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. Good luck with that. No.
Oh, yeah. I know.
You started in the technical world just like I did. And so how do you go from, coming in as a startup kind of situation, and how do you end up in these wonderful boards and doing all this fabulous work in the Bay Area? Who is Caretha Coleman? Give me that. Who was she 30 years ago?
Well, it's a long story.
Yeah.
And I'm I say that, but it's actually closer to 50, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
When I started at HP, I started working for HP. And knew nothing about technology. I literally got my job by going to the unemployment office. And I did, because I had worked. I loved what I was doing, but at the same time, they had deregulation, and they dropped the language requirement for people to fly internationally. And so we're sort of like, okay, well, what was I going to do? Now here I was. I mean, I thought I was old, right? But it was sort of like, okay, so now here I am. I speak these languages, but now I can't fly international because now they're letting all the women who are very senior to me fly without speaking a language. And so, I went to the unemployment office. That's what you do. And I said, here's what I know how to do. I speak these languages. I'm a good communicator. I'm really good at organization. I can engage people, blah, blah, blah. Just, I was probably lying my butt off a little bit too. But anyway, this woman just kept going on and on and on. She just kept saying, oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. HP this, HP that. I had no idea what she was talking about, and I said, what is HP? She looked at me like I had just crawled out from under a rock. And then she went on to say, it's Hewlett Packard, And I think, Kathy, at the time, they were the single biggest employer here in the Bay Area. And so I ended up going to work for them. I think 3 days later, I started the job and never looked back. And who knew? I was so fortunate to work for such a great company right off the bat, right? I didn't have to, in that way, kiss a lot of frogs. It was the most wonderful boot camp I could have ever asked for. I had 3 different opportunities in the 6 years that I was there to move up and sideways, but continue to learn. It was where I learned how to do really good HR, and I had great role models. And I will never forget, it the receptionist reported to us. And so part of my job was I would give, these are the days when we had breaks. I used to give the receptionist her break. And I was out there one day doing that. And this tall man walks into the front door and he's walking by me. And I said to him, I said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to give you a name badge." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "So," and I'm writing his name, and I said, "So can you tell me what your name is?" And he said, "Yes, Dave Packard." Oh my God. Yeah, exactly. The picture was there in the lobby. And I said, "I am so sorry." And his response was perfect. He said, "You did exactly what I want people to do. This is our process, and you're following it, and thank you very much." And he was so gracious, right? And that was really sort of where I learned about, but, for me, he could have, chewed me up if he wanted to, right? "Don't you know who I am," et cetera, et cetera. And he didn't lead that way. And for 6 years, it was that kind of learning, because the values were so strong. And I don't know if I would have been able to do what I did after that if I didn't have that part of my upbringing, right? So we have several upbringings, right?
Right.
That was a big.
He was willing to give them that respect for what they offered to his company.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a teacher in spite of himself.
That really, as a leader, your real job is to create the space and the place for people to do their best work. That you put all this put all these processes and work into hiring and finding the right talent. And oftentimes, what happens is that talent comes and it leaves so quickly because they bought into a hope and a promise that didn't really exist at that org. And a lot of that has to do with, "Oh, I'm king. Do what I tell you to do. Don't use your head," which is why I hired you. I couldn't pay for that kind of education.
My disappointment with Hewlett Packard when I came on board was when I would hear the constant comment, "That's not the HP way." To me, as an outsider coming in and not being hired through the college system as they were doing at the time, it seemed like they were not listening to the changes that were going on in the 80s. There was another piece of HP that I learned to sell, and that was really the culture there, as you describe it, a learning place, a place of listening to people. I saw women who were admin support being honored for an idea that would come up in a meeting, and I'd go, "Wow, that would never have happened at TRW when I was there." It came from the top and went to the bottom. You didn't come from the bottom, go to the top. Those were things I was able to sell as I became a more seasoned recruiter for the company.
Yeah. I loved it. I have very fond memories of HP, and then of course I ended up working for Howard Smith. Right before I left, I think the last 18 months. And that was great working for a Black manager, right?
Right.
And I hadn't had that opportunity before. And that was wonderful. And being able to create a true partnership with somebody in doing the work was great. And he took a chance on me because I didn't have the experience that he needed. He really wanted somebody who could work with their engineering teams. And it was great. And it just helped me to catalyze more of I am a firm believer that things happen for a reason. That, coincidences are those that basically are made for also a reason. And I didn't know it at the time, but, the first people that I had to spend time hiring when I went to the startup software publishing were all engineers. That's all I wanted, So that was great.
So perfect. You'd gotten the training under Howard's tutelage to deal with engineers.
Exactly.
Hey, how many languages did you speak when you left TWA?
So I was in English, Japanese, and French. because my mother is Japanese.
Okay.
And, back then, so my mother came to this country not knowing anyone after she married my father. Gave birth to me. And those were the days where when you did tours of duty overseas, you were gone for years, right? So he was in Korea, I think, for a year and a half, and then he'd come back and then he'd be gone again. So my mother was left to her own devices, and it was just the two of us. So we spoke Japanese until I started first grade.
Fabulous.
Right. And so then I learned English, and I learned French later as part of my education. But so I always tell people, I'm half Black, half Japanese. My mother was Buddhist. My father was Baptist. I was baptized Catholic because they wanted me to go to a parochial school.
Okay.
And so we had to be baptized in those days. None of this just pretending stuff.
Yeah.
And we lived on the all-white side of town. And I still, to this day, I really believe this. The reason I ended up in HR is because I really always felt, and the reason I took languages is because I always felt like my parents could not communicate with them. With each other.
Yeah.
With each other.
Because they're speaking these two different languages?
They're speaking two different languages. My father was very set in his ways. My mother was, old line Japanese. So sort of like whatever he said would go. But when she wanted to do something out of the box, it was always like World War III. And so I think that I learned at an early age to listen for things that has helped me along the way in my career. And I think that's why people consider me a pretty good executive coach, et cetera, because it's not just what you see, right? Most of the time in communication, I really thought still think good communication is everything.
It is. We have this narrative in this country that is overshadowing the events that are actually occurring in this country. Well, then the perfect example of that was when Kaepernick went down on one knee. And the narrative that came from that was the exact opposite. I totally agree. So we've talked about your first experiences in Silicon Valley.
Right, because I started at HP. TWA was a big company.
Right.
I started at HP and then went to Spectrophysics, which was a mid-sized laser manufacturer. It was great, but I hadn't internalized how different it was going to be. I chose that company because, I only left really because Ken and I got married, and HP wasn't big enough for both of us.
Right.
And then I left there and found some people who had come from HP who actually was at this company, Spectrophysics, and they were at the top of the ladder. And I thought, great, they're going to have the same values. Wrong. So it was very different. And also, they were struggling when I got there. And so I had gone from this place that had nothing but resources, right?
Yes.
To, oh my God, this is terrible. I remember going to my boss after the first 30 days and I was crying and said, I made a big mistake. This is not where I want to be, And I was doing everything. It was a new division for this company, but I had gotten used to something else. I was living that, right? So I'd gotten spoiled, stuck it out. I was there for 2.5 years. It was a wonderful experience because I learned how to manage in the downtime. I got great experience in managing the downside of revenue. Mm-hmm. I had to lay off people. I had to run a recruiting organization. I wouldn't have had that opportunity because other people were getting laid off. So they gave me the opportunity. So it was great. And that's why I always tell people, you never know where opportunities are going to come, right? And what is going to feed your next thing. And that was when I got the call to go and be the chief human resources person for software publishing. And had I not done that stint at Spectrophysics, I would not have been able to go from HP to that.
And the harder it is, the more you learn, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because in a little startup, you did everything.
Everything, yeah. That's what I liked about being at the startup too.
Yeah, it was just, you worked so hard, but every day you went home, you'd accomplished so much. Or you hadn't, right. But it was fun.
one day at Software Publishing, like I was the 30th employee, and I remember, I'm answering the phone, right? Because we're doing everything. So we're answering the phone, we're packaging up software packages, all this stuff. And the phone's ringing, and so I'm answering the phone. Software Publishing, can I help you? Yes, I need to talk to your VP of Human Resources. Hold on, please. Oh, hi, this is Caretha Coleman.
Yes. Just change the phone to the other hand.
That's the way it was,
That's right.
But I loved it. I just so enjoyed being there every minute.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what got me into, so I was there for 10 years, but that's what got me into working with startup companies after I left, because I started interviewing for these other big HR jobs, and I realized in my interviews, I just didn't want to do that anymore. I don't want to build an HR organization. I don't want to be in a big company. I want to sort of go back to the starting point. I want to be with small teams, and, and I want to create culture and values, and I want to have input on all of that and work with the executive teams. And that's really how I got into consulting. I had thought about doing consulting.
I think I had, when I worked at the thing that got me into consulting was Hewlett-Packard. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to start a little company that would provide HR services for not necessarily corporations, but places like
right.
And that was my client, the banks, the cleaners, real estate offices.
It could have been that, these big companies now that do interim HR stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I am trying to impress upon the next generation is, the thing that I didn't do. One, because I really didn't think about it that much. Two, because I didn't see myself doing that. But I could have started a company, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, and I want our next generations to be thinking about that.
You want to be entrepreneurial then. How many boards are you on? How many people are you helping on these boards? I mean, what are you still doing that work, working on the different boards?
Yeah, so I am on one public company board, private company startup board, and I am on healthcare board, the Dignity Health board, and I'm chairing that. Mm-hmm. And then I've been on that board for 16 years. It's actually time for me to come off. And I have. And then I have a number of national nonprofit boards that I serve on. One is Facing History and Ourselves. Another is, I actually can't name this one yet, but soon to be one. What I'm finding, and the Leverage Network. So the Leverage Network is an organization, nonprofit organization that focuses on training and placing, but mostly training and getting people ready to serve on boards, and it's for Black executives. Mm-hmm. And so I chair that board. Love the work. It's based out of Chicago. We're doing it in little steps, but hopefully now we're at a point where the organization's at a point, and hopefully the world is at a point where we can sort of create some synergies to get things to move further a little faster. Mm-hmm. And I do still a little bit of executive coaching, not a lot, just because I don't have as much time as I used to. And with the board work, it's really about moving to action on different parts of the agenda, right? So on the healthcare board and others at this point, the agenda seems to be very similar. It's sort of, okay, so what do we think about the whole race issue with healthcare? One of the things that's really kept me involved in healthcare that I love so much is that the people that we are serving, by and large, are more than half people of color and women and children, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's the underserved population. When you look at an organization like Dignity Health, now called Common Spirit, It's about that population. And if you look at almost everything I've done, whether it's been by design or happenstance, again, I don't believe in coincidences. I spend most of my waking hours working with underserved communities. So whether that's the East Palo Alto YMCA, or whose mission it is to provide quality health care to the underserved, or working with the Leverage Network to ensure that we are promoting and placing people of color, Black people, on boards of corporations and healthcare organizations. It's all got the common thread. And facing history, same thing. And that's a good thing for me, because it allows me to really have a focus, even though I'm doing it in different ways and in different places and with different people. Hopefully that also extends my reach in terms of who I can have these conversations with and where I'm getting my learning from to make me better.
You don't play the same role on each board, I'm assuming. What is the common thread throughout the board for you, for your board work?
Well, part of the common thread right now would be the subject matter, right? The discussion around, we're really about asking the right questions, right? So at the healthcare system, it would be things like, do we have an equity agenda? What does that look like? What does it mean? What kind of action does it move us to do within our healthcare system that we have? Is the information aggregated or disaggregated? What does that tell us? When we look at things right now, like COVID, and the fact that it disproportionately affects Blacks in our country, what do we do with that? Is that our experience in our big hospital system? Because we are the largest in the country now with that. What does that mean in terms of the millions of people? So it's asking those kinds of questions and having those questions at the board level. But, we're not doing the work. It's the management team that does the work. And see if, does it strategically take us to where we want to go and how we want to show up in the world as a healthcare organization? Or if you look at, so now the Real, I'm on, that's the public company board that I'm on, sort of like, and I've just started there. So, some of those conversations on a going forward basis, has to do with, where are we doing business? How are we doing business? How do we show up with our employee base? What does that look like? We have people who work in the warehouse. We have people who work in the retail centers that we have, because we actually do have some brick and mortar stores. We have people who are riding around everywhere to pick up, different clothing, et cetera, or who are engaging people. What do they look like? Are they getting the help that they need? What does it mean in terms of, some of the things that you talked about earlier, in terms of not just keeping numbers, but really making sure that we are sustaining the talent that we have, no matter what they look like. And, oh, by the way, do we have a special program for people who look like me? So I'd say that's sort of the common thread, right? So it depends. It depends on what the subject matter is with the board, and certainly with the Leverage Network board and the Facing History boards. So it's philanthropy, but what does that mean in terms of the constituents? So with Facing History and the teachers that we work with, to provide them with the right kinds of stories around our history that are presented and that we engage with our student body on, because now the student body, they're the ones who are going to be making these decisions on a going forward basis for how we build community and how they show up in community and how we hold each other accountable. We want to make sure that the stories that they have are very different from the stories that we have. And also, what is our statement as a nonprofit organization in terms of how we're going to show up in terms of the issue on race? We can't be silent. There's nowhere to hide. People expect to hear from us. So what are we going to do? Right? And do we have the right people sitting at the board table to help make those decisions and inform those discussions?
How do you determine, though, if you do have the right people at the board table? Is that done prior to them getting in halfway through it?
Yeah. Well, when you're recruiting a person for the board, you go through. I think if you're doing it the right way, you are going through some of the same process as you would if you were hiring a person to work for a company. The difference is that you aren't, right? These aren't people who are going to come in and do the day-to-day work. These are people who are going to help with strategy. And so they would have had to have seen some of what you're going to experience, and what you hope to have is a good complement of experiences sitting around the table, right? And that's why you also need that complement of people so it does begin with backgrounds and experience and expertise that they can bring. Are they going to be able to engage with others, right? In all organizations of any kind and teams, you got to be able to play with others well. But at the same time, you have to be willing to and able to use your strong voice to get your point, which may be on many days, on many different subjects, a very differing point than anyone else has. And you have to be able and willing to do that, or else you're just taking up a seat.
Yes. What type of changes did Caretha have to go through to become this board member, this board trainer? What initial changes had to happen to you to become that?
I didn't do it as strategically as people are today, because they can, and because it is becoming a more open system. Whereas before, being on a board was very closed, right? It was like, this is part of the problem. It's all about who you know. And if you only know the people that you went to school with and hung out with and so forth and so on and worked with, they're going to look like you. And so, we have this challenge where a lot of the boards are very, very white. And so it wasn't a strategy. And I started with nonprofit board. My first board was the YMCA. Like my first job, I didn't know what I was doing. It sounded good. I liked what the Y stood for. The only thing for me is initially I felt like it was very expensive to belong to the Y, and therefore I felt that not a lot of Black people or people, underserved people. So I went on the board of the Y for, I want to say 2 or 3 years. I think I did one term. And I decided that it wasn't for me at first because of all those things. But what I had gotten wind of, because I was on that board at one time, is my understanding was that at some point in time, there were some people and some conversations that were being had that that maybe, just maybe, we would have jurisdiction over footprint. And at the time that I joined the board, we didn't. It was Santa Clara County, which East Palo Alto was not a part of our footprint. But my understanding was they were looking into it, and maybe, just maybe, we would be able to do a YMCA in East Palo Alto someday. And so it was upon my leaving that I said to the executive director, if you ever decide that you are going to actually create a YMCA in East Palo Alto, I would be very interested in taking a look at that. And so sure enough, a few years later, I got a call, and it was Lou Platt and his wife Joan were in the conversation, and Lou was on the board at that time, or at least on a task force. And the task was to do the homework to figure out if it was feasible to build a YMCA in East Palo Alto. And so they added me to the task force. And then the rest of his history. We were doing programs there, even though we didn't have a building there. We ended up putting a trailer there and started running our programs out of a trailer, and working with school district there to run some of our other after-school programs. Now we're going to launch a capital campaign, and I headed up the capital campaign. And the next thing you knew, we raised ultimately $22 million. We built the YMCA, and it's there. But again, it was to serve the underserved community. And when I started the project, when we started the task force, it was in the early 90s, it was 68% Black population. Wow. And by the time we went through the task force, did the feasibility study, and got the building built, it was just the other way. It was 68% Hispanic. And which is still fine, because it's still an underserved population, and they need that. And so that's what launched me with the nonprofit stuff. And then other people started calling me, well, would you be on this board, or would you consider this? And I just, would start saying yes. And then the next thing I knew, I got a call to be on this hospital board, right? Again, underserved community. They wanted somebody with my background who had organizational development, because healthcare was in flux. Everything was changing, and they knew that they were going to be changing a lot as an organization and company, and they wanted somebody who brought the background, who focused on exactly that. How do we handle the people product part of it, and how do we strategize
for good people on these boards? And and let's face it, the list of folks of color is pretty short in this valley, and it's diminishing as we speak. I think we're like 3% or under 3% of the population now, particularly in Silicon Valley. So, I think the way is wide open for you to.
There are many more than you think, though, Kathy, and also there are more the younger generation, right? Everybody's a kid to me anymore, but if you're 30, 40, 35, 40, 45, people are now getting tapped to be on boards. And especially now that there is, this statement that they want to have more diversity, and they actually Black diversity more specifically, people are getting these calls, which is really wonderful to me. And I think things change with time. Thank goodness it is. And had this happened when we were younger, we probably would have been on more boards. Who knows? But I'm glad that it's happening now.
So when you get on these boards, are you conscious of, or do you feel that you're opening doors for folks of color for the future, for them to look at other people like yourself or someone at least of color to be on those boards?
I consider that part of my job. And I also consider the conversation about the fact that you don't only have to have just one Black person. Right?
Yeah.
You can have more, really. It's okay.
It's all right.
And as part of my job, for the number of companies, most of them, who have a Black person on the board, it tends to be the only one. An unspoken word, I think, has been, okay, well, we have one Black, let's check it off. We have this, we have that. Yeah. Not to diminish the return that they get from that Black person or brown person sitting on the board, but it's just, it's a different way of thinking about it. They don't think about it in terms of groups of people, It's sort of, you never have the conversation that we have too many white people on board, or you have too many white people on the executive staff, or what have you. But somehow, because it's a person of a different color, that does come into at least the unspoken conversation.
Right. The subconscious, unconscious bias that we...
Whatever it is, it's not good. Yeah. And so, yeah. But I do, and there are a number of us who talk to each other about this, and we all agree that that's part of our job, that we need to bring other people along while we are on the board, not wait until we get off the board, while we're on the board.
So they're not.
And when people are being recruited, same kind of thing, because if you're going to be on a board, ultimately, it's usually because you have the expertise that you've garnered in a role at a company that has been part of the C-suite, right? Well, if people aren't on the C-suite, guess what? They're not going to be on the board. And so it's more of that. That has to continue to happen. People of color need sponsorship within companies from the top, where others are saying, people in charge are saying, okay, I am going to pick out 2 or 3 people, whatever, and I am going to make it my job to bring them along so that they can be the heir apparent to whatever this next role is, right? Because the pipeline building discussion is old.
Is old, you say?
Yeah. Because normally you get, we just need to, we've started to hire people at mid-level roles so that they can rise up to opportunities in the C-suite. Okay, well, I'm not talking about 10 years. I'm talking about now. You need more color. So you can do both. You can grow people from within, and you can get people from the outside and bring them in. Because for a lot of people, you can't be what you can't see. So if they're not up there, then,
Right.
they're going to think that they can't do that.
Mm-hmm. And you can't do what you don't know.
Yeah. And so it's a lot of different parts of the food chain that have to work together. But it's definitely not impossible. It's very possible.
Well, to take it in just one more direction, you and your husband both have been profiled over the years as being whoever they say you are in these articles that we read and whatever. Into some of these statements, are they profiling you correctly, or would you take it, exception to some of these statements?
That's a hard question because I don't even know what the statements are. I mean, so I've heard visionary, and I get that. I have a theory about people who are visionary. You're only coined a visionary if you are right? If you could have a vision and it could be totally wrong, but you still could have been a visionary, but nobody ever calls you that because it didn't come to fruition. I just envision that the world can be different and better than it is right now. And I don't know how to put a lot of words around that, except for if I think about this moment and the conversations that we're having and the work that people are doing around social injustice. That sort of takes me to that place of, wow, if we all do this together, and even the white people who are saying they want to be part of the solution, and they're willing to write checks, they're willing to use their voices, they're willing to go to Capitol Hill, they're willing to do all of these things to really invoke change, then I envision that. Then, 10 years from now, we're having a really different conversation, Kathy, than we are right now.
Yes.
Around these issues. And, and hopefully we're working hard to find jobs for all these people who are now creating different new talent around the different needs that we're going to have, because we have businesses 10 years from now that we haven't even, and a lot of those people are Black and brown people. I would love nothing better than that. And some of those Black and brown people have now, are not incarcerated, but maybe they once were, but they are now on a track where they can be really good contributing human beings. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of people who are locked up who are not already good human beings. They haven't had the opportunity to contribute. And I would just love that. But I don't think that makes me a visionary. I think that's what I want.
And I would say you're a purposeful visionary. Mm-hmm. You have a purpose for this vision of yours. It's not just a what if. It is why not, kind of. Why can't we get there? And if we want to be there, here is the work we have to do in order to be there.
Well, I definitely feel that. Part of it is because of what I said earlier in reference to spending most of my waking hours, working with underserved communities, and working with us, our Black community. I will accept that is a big part of who I am and what's important to me, and what Ken and I. It goes back to what you just said about why not. So if why not, then why not us?
Right.
We, Ken and I that's where we planted ourselves.
Right.
And if people look at us as leaders in that way, fine, we're willing to do that because it makes us happy and engaged and makes us feel like we're doing something worthwhile.
And you're moving.
And that can change.
Right.
The future.
Thank you so much for your time, Caretha. I know you're a busy person, and I appreciate everything. And the conversation was wonderful. And thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right.
Of course. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I thank Caretha for our inspiring conversation, and I thank you for listening.